Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's nice to be back at the International Trade Committee after a brief hiatus. What's interesting to me is that we did a study when I was on this committee over a year ago on softwood lumber, which was an updated study from a few years before that on softwood lumber, which updated a study a few years before that on softwood lumber. And despite all of this, there's been really zero progress on resolving the softwood lumber dispute. And, this has real consequences. And it's had real consequences for workers, as you mentioned, Ms. Payne, and their families. I'm wondering if you have any idea or any thoughts about what would be the benefit to workers if the dispute was resolved and the $9 billion in tariffs were returned to companies that could invest in the bold strategy, redevelopment strategy that you've just talked about.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for that question. Obviously, we have, because of these other crises that are across the sector, when you add the tariffs on top of that, the new ones that we've just received, and potentially the 25% tariff that the president-elect is talking about, and by the way, potentially another 15% next year, the sector cannot carry on with these kinds of duties and tariffs looming and over their heads. And we have businesses right now, I would say to you, because of a whole bunch of factors, softwood being one of them, that are on the brink. And so they have to consider or reconsider whether they can actually make investments. And that's the scary part. So to your point, if there was an additional $9 billion back into the sector, this would certainly help us maintain and sustain many of the businesses that are out there today, employing a lot of uniform members, thousands of them all across this country. But in addition to that, I think we have to look, as you've mentioned, to the long term about how it is that we have a coordinated development strategy for the sector going into the future. And that's critical too. So we're not looking at this in a piecemeal way, but planning it in a much more consistent fashion, and this will benefit workers and the communities in which they live.
Ms. Payne, I'm sure you're aware that the softwood lumber industry combined called on the government to appoint a special envoy to try and negotiate a resolution of this. And during the last study, we discovered shockingly that this request for a special envoy to be appointed by industry sat on the minister's desk actually for 15 months without any kind of a response. And in our committee report in 2023, there was actually a recommendation that was accepted by the committee and put to the government that the Government of Canada appoint an official softwood lumber emissary for Canada to engage with the United States to enhance Canada's efforts designed to encourage the U.S. administration to negotiate a resolution to the current softwood lumber dispute. That was a year ago, plus the 15 months before that when it just sat in limbo. And here we are today with no resolution. Are you surprised at all by the government's lack of action on this recommendation and the recommendation of committee, which has led to some of the challenges we're seeing?
I think that there are a lot of challenges right now in terms of trying to negotiate a settlement with the U.S. That was true of the past year and the past number of years, and it's certainly going to be true going forward. I think any and all efforts that can be put in place to try and negotiate something is important. But I also believe that there is a role for us to play in Canada as well. And when I say us, I mean the entire forestry industry in Canada and the unions that represent workers across the sector. And we have to have a common approach. It's very difficult, I would say, for a government envoy to negotiate an agreement that benefits Canada if we can't get industry on the same page. And that has been part of the challenge. So anything that you can do as well, and this committee can do, and government can do to help industry reach a consensus on where a negotiating standpoint should come from, I think would be helpful to getting to a resolve. It's on all of us, is what I'm saying.
You mentioned in your opening statement a bold redevelopment strategy, not just for wood harvesting, but for the industry as a whole. I'm sure you've conveyed your desire for that strategy to the government. Have you had any real response from the government, or are you seeing any action from the government on the bold redevelopment strategy that would benefit companies, workers, and workers' families?
We have been actually saying this about a number of key industries, Kyle, in terms of, we've been very front and center on the auto industry, on the aerospace industry, on the energy industry. We have workers in every sector, forestry being one of the most important ones as well. And we've been promoting with all levels of government the need for a coordinated industrial strategy. That means the federal government working with provincial governments so that we can get there. And I would say I would like to see a lot more progress than we've made on this front. So there's lots of work to be done, but we can't stop pushing here. We have to get to a place. There are hundreds of rural communities, particularly in our country, who are depending on all of us right now to be able to get to a place where the industry can survive and thrive going into the future. And this means good union jobs for workers from one coast to the other.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Derek, Kevin, and Lana, for being with us here today. It sure is great to hear from all of you. I'm hoping to get two quick questions in. Ms. Payne, we heard from testimony last week that there was 90,000 jobs lost in the sector. And you had mentioned the significant impact that it had on your organization. Do you know how many of those 90,000 jobs were Unifor jobs?
We have been losing forestry jobs for decades right now, and this is why we have been talking about the need to have a proper industrial strategy to build and protect the jobs we have today, but also create new jobs.
For sure, I don't want to cut you off. I know we're at the very end, but hoping that if there's a number, we could get it. If you don't have it today, if we could send it to the committee, it would be great.
I sure can. There's tens of thousands of jobs that have been lost in the forestry sector over the last number of decades.
Unifor jobs.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And quickly to actually probably both you, Derek and Kevin, you'd mentioned that the cost of lumber now $26,000 more than the pre-pandemic. Kevin, during your opening testimony, do you know, and have you done any analysis on how many fewer homes that has impacted?
No, we can't. We can't do that analysis because it's been up and down in terms of different prices, interest rates, all of those things. But we do know when material prices go up, it does obviously make it more difficult to buy homes, build more homes, etc. So it's a challenge.
Very much, Mr. Martel, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your presence here today. Mr. Lee. So, lumber producers are directly impacted by these tariffs. They have to raise their prices to make up for these export losses. I'd like to know, how does this affect housing affordability, specifically for home buyers who are at a low income level?
Yeah, certainly fluctuations in lumber price affect everybody. Those at the lower end of the affordability spectrum tend to be impacted more, of course. And the strange thing is about the way the situation could work. In some cases, tariffs might end up lowering prices initially in Canada because of lack of demand. The problem then becomes, if we then have to shut down mills and then to balance the supply-demand equation, and then prices stabilize or start to go up, and then we hopefully increase at some point. We're looking to increase housing supply, and then there's more pressure on lumber prices in Canada, and they go up even further. So it's a very tricky and precarious position that we're currently in. And it affects everybody on the spectrum. It affects the lower income Canadians. It affects anybody looking to move up. It affects those looking to provide affordable housing, social housing, because their costs go up exactly the same way. So it's definitely a big challenge.
Monsieur Lee, avec un gouvernement
Mr. Lee, with a government that states that they want to increase housing affordability, they say that this is their priority. In my opinion, they're failing on some critical elements such as lumber. Do you think that these contradictions are harmful to trust in the industry's trust, rather, in federal policy?
There's definitely there's the good and the bad when it comes to policy at all levels of government. And so right now, we look at the lumber dispute that's been ongoing, and it's challenging. There's no question it's challenging. I think every government, and we have a new election, I'm sure it'll be top of the list, no matter who's in power next, to be pursuing this. But we really need all hands on deck. But as we've heard from everybody, it's complicated. On the housing policy front at large, we need all three levels of government playing their part to increase housing supply and address affordability. Could we do more? Of course. Is there more policy levers that we need to make use of? Of course. So we appreciate the attention on the subject and expect a lot more to be done moving forward.
Si la situation des tarifs reste
If the tariff situation does not change, I'd like to know what will be the long-term effects on the home building industry in Canada and the entire industry.
Well, again, that depends a lot with how the lumber industry reacts to the situation, right? Because there's no question we're a wood-based home building industry. We rely heavily on Canadian lumber. I don't have the statistics exactly, but I know, as Derek alluded to, we're practically close to, really high numbers in terms of Canadian lumber. And so the impacts on affordability and access to housing are going to be very much a function of how well the industry can survive and balance the equation in terms of supply and demand. So the types of supports to keep our industry moving forward are going to be absolutely critical. And if things, if things didn't go well, to answer your question, if mills started shutting down and everything, that would be disastrous for Canada, I think, in the long term, because we'd become, ironically, relying on importing lumber, which seems unthinkable in this country, but there comes a point where that could be a greater possibility, and our supply of and percentage of Canadian lumber and houses would go down, which would be, I think, catastrophic for all.
40.
Monsieur Derek, juste parce que vous avez parlé d'investissement.
So you spoke about investments that companies should have to make. It's difficult for a company to make such investments when there is such uncertainty surrounding the market. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I also say measures like the one in your community around caribou recovery, a plan that could put thousands of people out of work. That is destabilizing investment in Quebec. That's not helping. We need predictable access to the land base, and that's another business concern on top of all of this.
Thank you very much.